Okay, so I can start right now. Thank you so much for inviting me and for introducing me. Uh, I will talk about the uh, part of my research has been to develop what we call the Schumpeterian growth paradigm, uh, uh, trying to model the notion of creative destruction, which Schumpeter coined that term to refer to the process whereby new innovations displace old technologies, new innovations make old technologies obsolete. And the basic ideas, the three basic ideas on which the Schumpeterian growth paradigm rests is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation. Innovations result from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospect of innovation rents. And creative destruction, new innovations displace old technologies, make old technologies obsolete. At the heart of the paradigm, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need these innovation rents to motivate innovation investments. R&D and other type of innovative investment. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are tempted to use their runs to prevent subsequent entry and subsequent innovation because they don't want themselves to be subject to creative destruction. And regulating capitalism, market economy, is largely about how to manage this contradiction. And we see that, again, when we talk about AI, that this contradiction is coming back, is propping up. Two distinctive predictions of the Schumpeterian paradigm. One is that growth is positively correlated with firm turnover. And the other one is that more intense competition enhances innovation in frontier firms. So wherever you have a measure of new entry, job creation, job destruction, or whatever, cross-country, cross-region, whichever measure of creative destruction you take, it's positively correlated with per capita GDP growth. Cross-region, cross-country, cross-municipalities, you always find this positive correlation between measures of creative destruction and per capita GDP growth. The other thing is on competition. Competition tends to enhance innovation and growth in firms that are close to the technological frontier. In those firms, you innovate to escape competition and to remain the best. Firms that are lagging behind, way behind the technological frontier in their sector, competition, they are already discouraged, and competition tends to further discourage them from innovating. That's the orange line, okay? But of course, the more developed a country is, the more blue firms you have compared with orange firms, and therefore, overall, the more developed a country is on average, the more growth enhancing it is to have competition, okay? So that's the kind of basic ideas from the Schumpeterian paradigm. Now I turn to AI. Last year, I had the chance to produce with a whole AI commission, a report for the French president called AI, Our Ambition from France. My co-president was Anne Bouvreau, who in fact organized the AI summit in Paris last February. She was in charge of the AI summit, and she was my co-president on this report, okay? And I will, the whole first part of the report is on the economics impact of AI, okay? So AI first developed in the form of deductive rules of the type, if something, then something. That's what we call the symbolic approach, based on reasoning and instructions. Although the symbolic approach has not been abandoned, a statistical approach to AI has been gaining ground since the 1990s, with machine learning particularly. Unlike the symbolic approach, the statistical approach involves no explicit human instruction. The machine is trained to recognize links from a set of training data. The machine then applies those links to new data to perform a task. The success of the statistical approach rests on two essential ingredients: data on the one hand and computing power on the other hand. The AI revolution, particularly the generative AI, which is an acceleration within that revolution, affects all domains of activity: economy, public services, organization of work, media, culture, and so on. Just to give you an idea of the acceleration in the revolution, it took 2.5 years for Netflix to reach 1 million users. It took 2.5 months for Instagram to reach 1 million users. It took only 5 days for ChatGPT to reach 1 million users. Now, there is a pessimistic view and a less pessimistic view about AI. A pessimistic view is that AI would have very little growth impact and a very negative employment impact. More cautiously, I would say my own view is cautiously optimistic, is that AI has growth and employment potential but this requires appropriate policies and institutions to be put in place. If you don't have those appropriate policies and institutions, then you should worry about AI having very negative, very little growth impact and very negative employment impact. So my view is that intrinsically AI has potential. It all depends on what we human beings, we do, what our societies and countries do, governments do, what kind of policies and institutions we put in place. So let me talk first about AI and growth. Okay. So why do I think that AI should boost productivity growth? AI should boost productivity growth because it automates both product tasks in the production of goods and services and tasks in the production of ideas. That's something that you are very much, something we analyzed a lot in joint work with Chad Jones and Ben Jones. Okay. 1 second, let me get some pills. So now, why do I believe that AI should boost the production of new ideas? Well, it boosts the production of new ideas by expanding the information set and by helping recombine previous ideas and by improving the selection process, the project selection process. More broadly, AI helps just go right away. There's been already some work, by Eric Brynjolfsson and co-authors that just came out in the Quarterly Journal of Economics, and they look at the effect of generative AI on productivity in a particular US firm, okay? And this US firm, it's a Fortune 500 US company, which advises small and medium-sized enterprise on the adoption of software, okay? So the job consists mainly in answering the managers of these small and medium-sized enterprises, to answer their queries on how to install the software. And one way to measure the productivity is by how many resolutions per hour or how many resolutions per day. Okay, so typically the employees are a bit everywhere. The firm is a US Fortune 500 company, but has employees also in the Philippines or in other emerging markets. And they answer calls from these SME managers on how to install software systems. So what they do a difference in difference. They compare the productivity of an employee who has access to ChatGPT to the productivity of a similar employee in education, age, and experience that has not yet got the access to ChatGPT. And they show that accessing ChatGPT increases your productivity by 14% after 1 month and by more than 25% after 2 months. Okay, so it's kind of a significant productivity boost that ChatGPT generates. Okay. That's a very important thing. So now, of course, this is micro. It's at the level of one firm. And now you would like to extrapolate and say something about the macroeconomic impact of AI on growth, on aggregate growth. So, of course, one way would be to say, well, you could extrapolate from previous technological revolution, electricity and IT. Another approach, maybe more satisfactory, is to adopt a task-based approach. So extrapolating from previous GPTs, we know that the electricity revolution in the US, the electricity combustion engine of the 1920s, increased productivity growth by 1.3 percentage points if you are growing at per year. So if you are growing at 1% per year, you grow at 2.3% per year for 10 years, and then you get back to 1%. If it's the IT revolution, it increased productivity growth by 0.8 percentage point per year for 10-year period. If you are growing at a 1% per year, you are growing at 1.8 for 10 years and then get back to 1%. Okay, so it gives that thing. Without AI, you have the dotted line. With AI, you would have this. If you just think that AI revolution would be, in the ballpark of electricity or, IT revolution. Okay, you grow faster for 10 years, and then the slope of the green line becomes again the same as the slope of the dotted blue line. Now, you can have a more satisfactory approach would be to say, no, I know that AI automates tasks in the production of goods and services. Why not I go back and adopt a task-based approach, which is what Acemoglu does based on his model with Restrepo to estimate the effect of AI on TFP. And he concludes to a much smaller growth increase due to AI. He concludes that AI should boost productivity growth by only 0.07 percentage point per year, 10 times less than the IT revolution. Okay, and the way he does is to say, well, TFP gains over 10-year period is the product of, it depends on the GDP share of tasks that are exposed to AI, the share of exposed tasks for which AI should be profitable, the labor cost saving enabled by AI, and the labor share adjusted for AI exposure. And he builds, he borrows from the existing empirical literature to draw some numbers, some figures for each of these four components: exposure to AI, profitability to adopt AI, labor cost saving, and labor share. And he gets to this 0.7. So with my colleague, Simon Bunel, we revisited share of tasks, he would take 19.9. IMF believes that 68%, 60% in the US and 68% in the UK fraction of tasks should be exposed to AI. You see, so the interval to consider is this whole interval 18.5, 68, and there is no reason a priori why we should take the lower bound. Then among those tasks that are exposed to AI, we look at the share of exposed tasks for which AI would be profitably implemented. At today's cost, according to Zwanberg, 23% of visual tasks exposed to AI would be profitable to automate with AI for American firms. But on the other hand, this is assuming no technical progress on AI adoption. In fact, Zwanberg themselves propose three scenarios of annual cost reduction of 10%, 20%, and 50%, leading respectively to 30%, 50%, 80% of visual tasks exposed to AI that would be profitable within 20 years. And so the interval to consider is 23 up to 80%. And still there, we are on the pessimistic side, because progress in the field of computer vision has not been as spectacular as in other fields, for example, understanding writing or language, for example, where you can see here that much faster you catch up with human performance. You see, this line is much steeper than this line, which is for the visual task. So this downward bias, of course, is not taken into account. Then I get to the labor cost saving enabled by AI. Acemoglu makes an average between Noy and Zhang and the 14% of Brynjolfsson. But remember that after 2 months, in the Brynjolfsson paper, AI increases productivity by 25%. So if I were to do the average with the 25%, instead of 33, I would get to 40. And finally, altogether, the whole interval, the increase in productivity growth induced by the fact that AI automates tasks in the production of goods and services in anything that in the interval 0.07, 0.08, and 1.24 percentage point. Okay, and in fact, with Simon Bunel, we argue that the good average, the reasonable figure, would be 0.68 per year over a 10-year period, which is almost in the same ballpark as the IT revolution. So we think that if we just consider AI as automating the task in the production of goods and services, what would be reasonable is 0.7 percentage point for 10 years. That means 10 times as much as what Acemoglu claims. Okay. Now, remember that on top of that, AI also automates the production of ideas. Okay, so instead of having the red line like here, where for 10 years I grow faster than the dotted line and then back same slope as the dotted line, I should move up to the blue line here because AI also automates partly the production of ideas, facilitates the production of new ideas, and that has a permanent effect. So you should see that this slope is permanently higher than the dotted line. Okay, so now you might think that this is just abstract, but there is a very interesting paper by this MIT student called Artificial Intelligence, Scientific Discovery and Product Innovation, where the author explores the randomized introduction of an AI tool for materials discovery to a bit over 1,000 scientists in the R&D lab of a US firm. The lab focuses on applications of material science in healthcare, optics, and industrial manufacturing. And using detailed data on each stage of R&D, the author studies the AI's impact on material discovery and the downstream effect it has on patenting and product innovation. And then he does diff and diff again, difference in difference. He compares the productivity of a researcher in that firm that has access to AI to the productivity of a similar researcher that doesn't have access. So first you have the how many new materials you figure out. And researchers that have access to AI figure out 44% more new materials than those who don't have access. This gives rise to 39.4% more patent filings by those who have access to AI. And at the end of the day, it leads to 17% extra product prototypes generated. So you see really at work the fact that AI also facilitates the innovation process on top of the fact that AI automates tasks in the production of goods and services. Okay, so that's the thing. So the downside of AI. So for all these reasons, that AI has big growth potential. Okay. Now the problem is the fact that it may get against. It may be hindered. This growth potential may be hindered by inappropriate institutions, and particularly the lack of competition. And here I show you the evolution of average yearly TFP growth in the US. It increased a lot between 95 2005, as you can see, and then went down a lot since 2005. TFP growth, annual average TFP growth in the US. And that's particularly, and that has to do a lot with the fact that you have emergence of superstar firms. You can see that concentration, particularly in services, but in all areas, increased a lot in the 90s because with the IT revolution, you had the emergence of superstar firms, Google, Walmart, Microsoft. Those firms first, they carried the growth process. They knew how to harness the power of IT, and therefore they pushed growth, productive growth in the US. But then what happened is through merger and acquisition, they became tentacular. That's why you have this rising concentration, and that's why also the average markup, which is the red curve, goes up. It's not so much because within firms the markup would have gone up. The blue curve shows no, which is the within firm markup evolution, so no upward trend. It's a composition effect. The high markup firms, Google, Walmart, Microsoft, became more pervasive through merger and acquisition, and that's why you have it's a composition effect. It's a relocation effect. The high markup firms becomes more prominent in the US. That's why the average markup goes up. So the thing is that with the IT revolution, you had the emergence of these superstar firms. Initially, they push the growth process, but eventually they hinder the growth process. Why? Because they discourage entry of new firms. And you can see the entry of new firms in the US going down since 2000 of all size, the firms of more than 10,000 employees, firms at between 1,000 and 10,000, and firms of less than 1,000 employees. But entry has gone down. And so what happened is really the Schumpeterian effect I mentioned before. You have those who take advantage of the IT, they grow huge, and they end up discouraging the entry of new firms. Now, why is that relevant for AI? Is that because you see the value chain of AI, particularly the upstream segments in the AI value chain, are dominated by superstar firms. Cloud is dominated by Amazon, Google, Microsoft. You have only one big actor, GPU, on the market for graphic processors. So you see, the thing is that AI has growth potential, but we need appropriate competition policy. That's why in the report we say, open AI, open source, very important, open source, extend the Digital Market Act to the whole value chain of AI, have a very dynamic competition policy, try to regulate merger and acquisition. If you feel that the merger and acquisition will hinder future entry and future innovation, you should regulate future, merger and acquisition. So there is a whole set of things, and data access also, and regulation also. In Europe, if we over-regulate, that goes against competition. We need regulation, but we need a good regulation. If we over-regulate, the large firms know how to cope with the regulation. The small entrants, they don't know how to cope with regulation. So we need the right type of regulation, but we should avoid over-regulating, because this becomes an entry barrier. Okay. I move now to AI and employment. In previous work with Céline Antonin, Simon Bunel, and Xavier Jaravel, we looked at the effect of robotization on employment, and we looked at a comprehensive the French firm-level database, and we compared the evolution of employment in firms that adopt industrial equipment or automation devices to the evolution of employment in firms that do not do that, which are similar otherwise. So you have no pre-trend here. It's a diff in diff again. And we see that the firms that adopt industrial equipment see total employment go up. Same with firms that robotize. And why is that? Is because it's true that you substitute robots for manpower, but on the other hand, you have a productivity effect. Firms that innovate, that adopt robots and automate, they become more productive, therefore more competitive. Therefore, the world market for their products goes up, and that's therefore why they hire more people. So this productivity effect seems to more than offset the substitution effect. So now, what about AI? So we did a survey covering 9,000 representative firms in France, and we compare the evolution of employment in firms that adopt some AI and similar firms that do not adopt AI. We have a treatment group and a control group. And again, we see overall firms that adopt AI have their employment go up. Again, it's a productivity effect because you see their sales also goes up. So again, the productivity effect seems to more than offset the substitution effect. Now the thing is that it's not uniform over all kinds of employment. For example, the effect of AI adoption for administrative purposes on highly exposed and a priori substitutable employment, executive secretary, administrative staff is no longer positive. You see, so it's not uniformly good on all jobs to have AI adoption for employment. So that very much resonates with a recent paper called Generative AI and Jobs. It's an ILO working paper, and the authors analyzed the exposure of various types and jobs to generative AI, and in particular to ChatGPT. So they put a low score to tasks with a small replacement risk. They put a middle score to tasks with medium replacement risk, and they put a high score to tasks with high replacement risk. And they view a job as a set of tasks. Each job is a set of tasks. So for example, here on the upper panel, you have managerial jobs, construction managers, hotel managers, mining managers, manufacturing manager. You see that most, and you have the range of tasks ranked by, the degree of substitutability by AI. So you see that for managerial jobs, most of the tasks are not substitutable by AI. You see, only those are. In fact, those jobs are ideal, the top of the top panel. Because in fact, you see it's perfect to have a few tasks, AI'd. Those are typically the boring tasks so that you can concentrate more on the non-substitutable tasks, which are the dark blue tasks. And so for our managerial, it's good news. I mean, AI overall, okay? Whereas now, if you move down to clerical support workers, typists, travel consultants, scribes and related workers, inquiry clerks, etc. You see that most tasks are in the yellow-orange interval, which means that most tasks seem to be substitutable. So if you only look at those who are at risk, the jobs at risk are the jobs for which most tasks are substitutable by AI. Then you would say, well, if you can represent the jobs that's in France. I mean, according to this map, but I do that for the French jobs, but you can do that for any country. So when I move upward, I move from low exposure to AI to high exposure of the job to AI. And when I move from left to right, I move from a job where a high share of tasks are substitutable by AI to jobs where most jobs, AI is complementary, not so much substitutable. So what I should be most worried about those jobs here, which are both highly exposed to AI and where a high share of tasks are substitutable by AI. Accountant, telemarketer, secretaries, okay. So if I look in those terms, the jobs downstream here, they are okay because they have low exposure to AI. And those jobs here at the northeast, on the northeast of this graph, are jobs which have high exposure, but most tasks are not likely to be substituted away by AI, okay? So now you can use this classification. Instead, where I start from accountant, telemarketer, secretary, and I start here, and I say, well, maybe the job at risk are those jobs up to there. That represents 10% of the whole of total employment, because you see on the vertical, I'm representing cumulative share of total employment. So those jobs at risk of being replaced by AI seem to be like in a range of 10% of total employment. But in fact, I'm being overly pessimistic there because, in fact, what we've done now is to use this representation here, this partition, and then regress employment on AI for each of those regions. So first, we start with the the jobs which have low exposure to AI, and we said, not surprisingly, we see that AI adoption that has little effect on employment on those jobs. So here I'm okay. Then I look at the Northeast, and I see a positive effect. I would have expected a slightly bigger, more positive, but it's a slightly positive effect of AI on employment there. And then I was expecting here a highly negative effect. And surprisingly, we found a positive effect again here. And why is that? Because it all depends on the use of AI. You see, if you consider AI for production processes here, or for ICT security, those use of AI, even on those jobs that are highly exposed and where most tasks are substituted by AI, if you look at AI adoption for production processes or ICT security, it will have still a positive effect on employment there. The only negative effect is AI is when you look at those jobs which are highly exposed with a high share of tasks substituted away by AI, use of AI, which is for administration processes. So you see, to be really negative, you need highly exposed, substitutable by AI, and use of AI for administration processes. You see, so that's much less than the 10% that I had represented here. You see, it's much less than this 10%. So overall, I don't think there is anything like in the short run, maybe in the short term, there might be existential risk of AI. I think that AI can generate new jobs. It will, of course, force people to reinvent their jobs, but I don't see mass unemployment in the short and medium term. What you need is appropriate institutions and policies in the same way as you needed appropriate competition policy to harness the growth potential of AI. You will need appropriate institutions and policies to harness the employment creation potential of AI. You need first an adequate education system with good PISA tests, like they had in Finland, or like you have to look at your PISA test and have a very good education system. At school, you learn to learn. It's very important. On top of a good education system, you can have adequate labor market policies. For example, in Denmark, they have the flex security system. When you lose your job in Denmark for 2 years, you have 90% of your salary. The state retrains you and helps you find a new job. And you see, there's been this, Alexandra Roulet, my colleague at INSEAD, has looked at the impact on health of losing your job in Denmark. She compared the health of a worker in a firm that closes down to the health of an identical worker in age, education, and experience in a firm that does not close down. It's a difference in difference again. No impact of losing your job on purchase of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, or sleeping pills, unlike the US. No effect on the probability of visiting hospital for circulatory system. No effect on mortality. So my view is that harnessing the growth potential of AI, appropriate competition policy. Harnessing the job creation potential of AI, good education system and good flex security system. Also, I would like to stress, and I'm almost done, that I stress the role of competition. We need competition because you innovate to escape competition. And we need, entry. Countries where you have low competition and low entry are not innovative countries. Okay, so it's very important to foster competition. And in the case of AI, I stress the role of open source, of easing data access, of extended the DMA, the Digital Market Act, to the whole value chain of AI, and to avoid excessive regulation. You also need, but it also requires industrial policy. Invest in local computing power, in AI diffusion, maybe advocate an AI exception in public research funding. There we need also investment. So I'm in favor of competition, but I'm not ruling out government investment and industrial policy in the name of competition policy. I believe that we need both competition policy and industrial policy. We need both competition policy and government involvement. Okay. And finally, I will end up is the Draghi report. What Draghi tells you is that the US and China now are very, aggressive on breakthrough high-tech innovation, and Europe has been stuck in low-tech incremental innovation because we don't have the ecosystem that would favor breakthrough innovation. We need a truly single market. We don't within continental Europe. We need a good financial ecosystem of innovation with more venture capital, more institutional investment, and more securitized loans, but we need a really adequate financial ecosystem. And we need the equivalent of the DARPA, BARDA, the modern instruments to do industrial policy in the US, which reconciles industrial policy and competition. We don't have anything of the like. And we need to do much more to finance basic research. I am in favor of creating ERC for labs. I pushed a lot. President Macron on Monday took my idea that we should create an ERC program for labs, not only ERC program for individual grants, but we should have ERC. I know that the ESRC in Britain funds labs. My friend Van Drienen had created a lab called POID, POID, thanks to this ESRC financing. And I know that you have many good labs financed by ESRC. We don't have anything equivalent at the European level. And that's why I'm in favor of creating this new program of ERC for labs. But we need to do much more. And of course, AI revolution. We have very good mathematicians in Europe. We have very good computer science people. We have very good engineers. So we have everything to be fully part of this AI revolution. But to harness, to really take advantage and not miss that revolution like we missed in part the IT revolution, we need really to push on those fronts. And that I think I will conclude my talk this way. Thank you very much. Hello.
Yes. Thank you, Philippe, for your intervention. Let me now open the floor for questions from the audience. Who wants to start? Diane?
No, I'll take. Yes, it is. It is working. Philippe, this is Diane Coyle. Thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question about the task-based approach and whether that's sufficient for thinking about the effects of AI on productivity. And the analogy I have in mind is that when you think about the just-in-time revolution in the 1990s, I guess, the tasks involved in manufacturing didn't change very much. It was the way that they were configured that changed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the task-based approach seems to me to omit that sort of process change part of productivity gains. And I wondered what you thought about that in the context of AI.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that already we see the productivity gains of AI in production of goods and services. I showed the the Brynjolfsson paper. And when you talk to people who use AI, in various areas, they can see at a very micro level an increase in productivity. You see, so the whole thing is how you aggregate. So one approach is to take the task-based. But that's only very partial. Alors, you're right. It takes time. Any general purpose technology takes time. It does not diffuse right away. So you have a period of gestation, and then you have a takeoff. Usually that's the way it happens. Jovanovic, Rousseau, and all these people have looked, and Paul David before, have looked at the diffusion process of new general purpose technologies, and AI is no exception. So there is a period where nothing much happens, and then suddenly there is a takeoff. But it's true that the task-based, the problem so far is that for me, a main limitation is that it focuses on production of goods and services. For the moment, it doesn't look at the production of ideas. So there's been papers that look like the one I mentioned, that look particular, at a particular firm that where it gives access of its researchers to AI, and then you see more patents, more materials, and more. But the equivalent, you see, I haven't seen a macro study trying to extrapolate from this very micro evidence of an effect of AI on innovation, on the innovation process itself, on idea production, and look at the aggregate growth implication, and try to quantify the aggregate growth, effects of that. So those are the things. You're absolutely right. And I think, but that's why I'm technologically, I believe that we tend to underestimate the AI growth potential. But on the other hand, we also ignore the institutional obstacles to that get in the way of harnessing this growth potential. You see that's it's piece of both. I'm optimistic in the sense I think people have maybe underestimated the technological potential, but I'm pessimistic in the fact that they also ignore all the kind of institutional barriers to harnessing this growth potential. We see that would be my response to you, Diane. But I take on board what you say completely.
If I may follow up, Philippe, what would you be looking for if you wanted to track an increased pace of ideas generation or take up? Are there indicators that we could look for?
But here in the case of that firm, you look at patents, but citation weighted patents, entry of new firms, and then measure productivity growth. But we know also that, as you know, lots of productivity growth is not well captured by measured GDP per capita GDP growth. So there are various measures, various proxies. So, for example, I didn't show, it's very interesting. We look at AI, at patents that use AI. So, for example, one thing is very interesting. If I can share again, I don't know if I can share my. If I share, I don't know. Yeah, I cannot share. But in fact, I didn't show that you see the AI the patents that use AI, that cite AI papers, they tend to be which has really which has soared up over the past years. Okay, they tend to be better patents as well. That's very interesting. So you can look at the number of patents that cite AI papers, but you can look also at their quality, how general they are, how innovative they are, how well cited they are. There are various metrics on the patents. We're using text now. You see, you can go very far, but we can be very sophisticated now on how to measure the generality or the novelty or the pioneering extent of the patent using text and things. And I think there you can do a lot there. You see, so I would take those measures seriously as well, to look at the extent to which AI boosts innovation-based growth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, here.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question about the point you made about the superstar firms that are ruling the AI space now. Most of those come from the US and China. And I was wondering what your thoughts are in terms of a solution or maybe a way of Europe to enter that market when we will continue to have these firms. We don't have influence on the US policies regarding monopoly forming or breaking off of those companies into separate sections. So how do we then make sure that we can invest in, for example, companies to create our own superstar firms, but then also keeping track of all the other policy initiatives that we have in Europe and we also need to pay attention to?
Yeah. So, for example, in this report, I will send you the report. I will send to Diane the English translation of the report, and maybe and feel free to diffuse. So, for example, we advocated, compute data centers, the development of data centers of local computing power. As I told you, you see, AI rests on data and computing power. So it's good not to rely entirely on the data centers in the US. It's good not to rely entirely on the computing power in the US. So we have to build our own. And a big advantage, we have good data. For example, in the UK, you have a very good health data. So do we in France, actually. So when in areas where we have very good data, and we have very good people, very good engineers and mathematicians. There, building on that, the data And if we build local computing power and give access, and that's where the industrial policy is so important, we can be leaders on those things. You see what I mean? So there will be a lot of specialized use of AI, maybe not the most upstream, but the specialized use of AI in various areas. I take health, but it could be energy transition. And you see the great thing now, the great opportunity is that Trump, hates biology and Trump hates climate. Great, fantastic. Let's bring good researchers in biology, in climate, and give them access. We have to. That's why I want this also ERC for labs. Let's develop those ERC for labs. Let's attract those people and work with us, and we can be good. And also, I would like to tell you something. In my commission, I had Yann LeCun. You might have heard that name. He got the Turing Prize, which is a kind of Nobel Prize in this area. And Yann LeCun tells me, told us that, LLM is soon there will be something beyond LLM. And that could happen in Europe. We can be the one. Yann LeCun would love to work, people like him in Europe, especially nowadays, if we create a friendly environment. So it's up to us. It's incumbent on us to create an environment that will attract, researchers. They don't want to be very rich. They want to have comfortable life, but they are mainly driven by curiosity and by the fun of doing research. So they like freedom, and that you no longer have in the US. In Europe, we have freedom. We have, a social system which is way better than the US social system. And there are many attractive features of Europe, and we can attract those researchers. We have good data in a number of areas. There will be something better than LLM, pioneered by people that are Europeans. And so you see, I'm very, that's why I don't believe that we've lost it at all on AI, not at all.
Thank you. Question here?
It's building on the same point, really. There have been some new companies emerging, DeepSeek, OpenAI, and so on. So that sort of demonstrates that it perhaps is possible for new companies to emerge.
Mistral in France, Mistral, for example. You see
Okay,
Mistral,
so that's really my question.
Yeah.
Are there enough European companies of that kind?
Yeah.
It feels as if the most successful new entrants even are American or Chinese, and I wonder what we need to do.
No, China is also very aggressive. Now, it could be that in some areas we could cooperate with China as well. I don't know. You see what I mean? But we have to be very careful. Alstom, which builds high-speed trains, they went to China and spent a few years there. And after a few years, the Chinese told them, look, guys, we know how to build high-speed trains. We no longer need Alstom. So you have to, when you do business with China, you have to be a bit careful. Make sure that you're not being expropriated, that your intellectual property rights are not being expropriated. But I think there is room for cooperation with everybody who wants to work with us on those things, of course, with appropriate regulations. China is there, the US is there, and the problem with Europe is that the problem with Europe is that Europe had three obsessions. What was the public deficit? I think they're right to be obsessed with that, but it was very much a kind of Germany 1930s hyperinflation trauma. Now I'm very happy because Germany is getting out of it with Merz. We want a Germany that invests, which is great news. The second thing is that in the name of competition policy in Europe, we precluded any form of industrial policy, which is absurd. DARPA, Defense Advanced Project Agency, it's a way to do industrial policy, which is competition friendly. And three, Europe so far has been a regulatory giant and a budgetary dwarf. When you are competing with, the US with their IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and the DARPAs and all that, and with China also has a very forceful industrial policy, you can no longer be on that stand. And but I think now there is a wake up in Europe. What makes me very optimistic about Europe is that really Germany now they realize they have to invest, and UK is back. I mean, Starmer and Macron are the best friends of the world. And I think that's great because we can't do that without being together. I think France and the UK need to work with in the areas of health, energy, military, AI, where there are all the reasons to cooperate very, very closely. And I would very much hope for European DARPAs that would involve the UK, France, Germany, and other countries that want to join on the very much coalition of the willing basis. We should align always on the max, never on the mean. And I think we can develop these DARPAs. The European equivalent of the DARPA in those areas, but with a coalition of the willing approach, and including definitely UK with us. So I think it's very exciting, the current time. I know that what happens on the other side of the Atlantic is worrisome, but on the other hand, it creates fantastic opportunities. And because really the main hub of freedom worldwide is Europe. And people want to live free. And we know that freedom and openness are the best inputs to research and to innovation. And now it's Europe that incarnates freedom and openness more than any other part of the world. And I think that's a fantastic asset.
Thank you, Philippe. We have questions from online attendees. The first one is, do you think there is a need for governments to incentivize STEM degrees as opposed to humanities degrees?
Alors, there is always this question. Of course, STEMs is very important to have STEMs, and but some people believe that we don't need humanities. So, for example, even in China, they believe that they don't need humanities. You see, and in fact, I think we do. Because you see, when you leave your family and you go to university, the great thing is that you are exposed to other people's ideas, different background, cultural background. And that happens mostly in humanities. You see what I mean? And you become disruptive in humanities. You look at Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg, he was a dropout from Harvard, but he took humanity. He had to take humanities. It's compulsory. I've been a professor at Harvard for 15 years, I know, and a student for 3 years. So humanities is part. And I believe that having humanities, it's very important because it makes you more disruptive. Because you've been through this, courses of philosophy, of economics, of sociology, or whatever, and you learn to confront ideas. And that's what humanities bring you. Is really the sense the use you make of freedom, of disruption, of the if you're just there, that's why I don't think that we can dispense with humanities, even if we want to be high-tech disruptive.
Okay, thank you. Another question online is on the role of AI diffusion for the macroeconomic impact. So AI innovation is certainly important, but a large share of the macroeconomic impact comes from diffusion. You mentioned in your slides policies to incentivize AI adoption. What do you have in mind?
This raises an important and difficult question, because there is always with innovation the problem. You have a kind of conundrum, or you have you have to reward the innovator, but you want to diffuse the innovation. Of course, if you diffuse the innovation right away, you dissipate the potential rents that could accrue to the innovator. You see, so you have to find systems that both reward innovators and diffuse. So Michael Kramer, for example, my colleague Michael Kramer is the Nobel Prize, Economic Nobel Prize 2019, wrote in 1996 a very interesting paper on vaccines, and he was looking at to malaria, against malaria, and he was very much interested. How can I design a system that would both reward innovators and allow me to diffuse? So he had the idea that governments would purchase the innovation from the innovator with a social markup. And then diffuse the innovation. So I think that we have to think of ways to do that. You see, it's true. It applies to AI. It also applies to green technologies. We need to diffuse green technologies to emerging countries, but at the same time, it should not be at the expense of rewarding those who created those technologies, who invented those technologies. So there are systems that of the kind that Michael Kramer suggested that could be beyond the health sector, could be used for AI and green very much.
Yes, Alexei.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm quite intrigued with the idea of measurement AI exposure, and my question would be, can you slightly walk us through the approach, how you measure AI exposure? Because in my understanding, AI is a stack of different technologies, and for example, LLM completely different from visual recognition completely different from AI using in robotics and movement. And second, if we kind of unify the approach, can we generalize it in terms of explosion or not? Because once again, deployment of robotics using AI for movement slightly different from deployment LLM model in a workflow.
No,
slightly different from.
You're right. We should do that very rigorously. So that still lies ahead of us. I think we are really, looking at the growth impacts of AI. It's still at its infancy. What I wanted just to argue is that it might be underestimated by other of my friends. But you're right. I mean, to really go, we should go with each sub-technology, LLM and others, look at the diffusion and look at the detailed thing. I think that would be, I think that lies ahead of us. It's not been done yet. But I wanted just to take argument with the fact that there would be no growth impact of AI. That I think is that's not true. I mean, you can talk to any, firm that adopts AI. They experience significant productivity increase when they adopt AI. And I wanted to challenge the view that AI would have little or no growth potential. It has big growth potential. We have to identify it better. And particularly, I'm interested personally in the idea creation part. That, of course, there's been a whole literature on ideas harder to find with my colleague Chad Jones, semi-endogenous growth models and all that. And I believe, we argue very gently. We are very good friends and we work together. And Jones was my co-author, Chad with Ben Jones on this AI and growth paper. So we are co-authors and very close friends. But I never believed so much that ideas are harder to find, but even less so with AI. I think certainly with AI, ideas might be easier to find.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question here.
Hi. I have a question regarding the materials basically that are necessary to create AI and everything within the value chain. A lot of the materials that we'll need are also, for example, in locations as China for certain rare earths, for example, or in other places of the world, usually that, are now exposed to more geopolitical sensitivities. How do you think that we should go about that? And do you have any worries about that in the coming years if Europe, for example, wants to be a leader in AI?
I think you raise a very important question, is that the AI value chain is an international value chain. And when you put trade barriers all over the place, you certainly slow down the movement. You make it more difficult to use AI to automate production of goods and services and to automate production of ideas. I mean, you slow down that process. So it would be very interesting to have studies trying to evaluate the impact of trade barriers on this international AI value chain, and therefore how it would damage the growth potential of AI. I think it's a very good idea. I can't tell you, and of course, always, it's always good when you have this kind of problem to diversify your sources and also to try to see whether, semiconductors, for example, I know in the Netherlands, they produce semiconductors we should, or at least the components of semiconductors, whether we should not do more of that at home, in Europe. So that's but for sure that will take a while before we can replace what we all what we got from we don't replace Taiwan overnight in semiconductor. Alors that's great that Taiwan, there is no trade barrier between Taiwan and Europe. That's great. But it's important to assess the impact of the trade barriers and to see what we can do to minimize the negative impact of the trade barriers, both through diversification and through industrial policy.
Thank you. We have a question online on the employment impact of AI. So you showed that this was rather limited. But do you think there is a risk that the effect weighs disproportionately on young people and potentially affect their career progressions later in their professional life?
There could be a concern there. I mean, for example, in legal profession, that usually you are trainee, you are, you do some training and some, and during those, and you have to do some tasks. If AI automates all those tasks, it may affect the career of an apprentice lawyer. You see, I mean, it's I just take that example. So it's important to. That's why in the report we, of course, say that AI should be, from kindergarten onwards, students should know what AI is all about. Of course, you have to make a smart use of AI in schooling, and AI should be in all, of course, university programs. AI for medicine, AI for legal, AI for it should be part. So I think it requires really integrating AI in the education system smartly. You don't want to give bad access to AI to for example, high school students. But I know, for example, in economics, I have a high school economic instructors that use AI to really as a tool, as a pedagogical tool, to make sure that initially, that no students is left behind, and they can individual follow up, individual tutorship of each individual student through AI. So with the help of AI, and I think that's so. You see, the thing there is that it will affect careers. It's very important that AI be part of the various, the various tertiary education curricula, and it's important that AI be used appropriately by instructors at all schooling levels. So there is a danger that AI could destroy careers. Like I have in mind these lawyers, that are, trainees, and what would a trainee lawyer do with AI? But on the other hand, I think that we can turn a danger into an asset, if we know. And I have the example of there is a lot, in fact, in education. AI and education is really something developing very fast, actually, and there are very good use of AI in education.
There is a question there.
Hi, thanks for the very clear description of the economic factors of which I've been quite unaware so far. My background's in research and deployment of automated reasoning of the form that you stated at the beginning had been abandoned in the 90s. I've been doing that for 30 years, since the 90s. And what I've observed firsthand, I think, the sort of transient nature of the introduction of these techniques, on the transient nature of their effect on growth. I'm also very interested, so my question's about this generation of ideas. So given our constrained knowledge of human creativity and also AI, do we believe that the research effects we're seeing are more than just AI addressing low-hanging fruit? Also, is there a possibility that once these techniques are a commodity, that changes the nature of research? It changes the nature of research that can cause growth. Given a competitive environment, once everybody has that capability, does the growth cease? So my actual question is about your graph where you show previous innovations having a transitory effect on growth, and then you claim that AI will have a permanent one because of the research.
Yeah.
Is there any other example where there's been a permanent effect on growth due to any introduction of technology?
Yeah, I think more than before. It's true that IT, it's true. I believe that AI, more than previous technology GPTs, would have a lasting effect. Now, because you see, in the research process itself, you make research easier. You see, you have many more possibilities. You see, but it's very interesting, this particular firm that I showed you, when they introduced AI in the R&D lab, they would figure out many more materials, in an abstract way. So because you see, a lot of growth is recombinant. So you find new ideas a lot by recombining all ideas. And the fact is that AI helps you produce many more recombinations. You see, so you expand enormously the range of possibility. But then AI also can help you select within that larger set of possibilities. And I think on both ends, AI plays a role. What I have not able to do so far is to quantify how much each of those hands, you see, how much steps contributes to aggregate growth. You see, that's what I would like to be able to do. You know, the extent to which you expand the possibility set and the extent to which you save time on selecting within the possibility set. I'd like to see particularly AI on each of those two, how much it contributes to aggregate growth. But that I haven't done yet.
Hello, this is Flavio from
Yes.
the OECD. Great
Yes.
talk. I have a comment and a question.
Yes.
The comment is looking at the empirical evidence, and the way I see some of the literature that looks at the impact of AI on productivity is that there is a little bit of a dichotomy between the study that look more at the firms and capture the more predictive analytics and machine learning, the struggle to find the strong effects, while the study that look at generative AI that are primarily experiments is where the strong positive implications for the use of AI and this impact of productivity come from. So the question is whether you think that a framework, in order to look at the aggregate growth implications, whether a framework that takes into direct account the possible GPT, general purpose technology nature of AI might be a reasonable one, and links to the comment by Diane on the limitations of the task-based framework, because maybe there is the pervasiveness and the diffusion side, and diffusion occurs among firms and among workers, and workers is maybe what the exposure and the exposure to generative AI is capturing. Then there is the improvement over time of the technology itself, which might drive in the future further increases. And then there is the innovation spawning, which is what you mentioned, the idea generation channel that might be one that is going to impact aggregate growth in the longer run.
Yeah, I think very much. I mean, another breakup which is interesting is manufacturing services. I think that the AI, the impact of AI, the task base, very much in manufacturing. I believe that the ChatGPT has also impact, you know, in the service production very much. So that's another breakdown that we should explore. You see, services do structural change, how AI affects the structural change process, and how we affect differently, you know, manufacturing and services, and both with respect to the growth impact and the respect to the employment impact. I'm currently working on that actually, and so that's very interesting. That the employment impact maybe more positive was prior to the ChatGPT and in manufacturing, and now I'm looking services ChatGPT much more. But you're right. I mean, now we have to on the one hand aggregate, on the other hand, you know, decompose and do both.
Thank you, Philippe. I'm afraid we are reaching the end of the time allocated for this session. Thank you again. This is always a pleasure to listen to your talks. And thank you in the audience for all your questions. I'll now pass the baton to Diane, who will chair the last session of this conference.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So maybe I can invite the panelists for the last session to join me here. Make sure I'm sitting in the right place.
Branch enough chair.
Oh,